The Russians have been very good at pushing their propaganda. And I'm giving you an example here in the thumbnail. Therefore, the knowledge of the Russian language, you need to be a Russian speaker because it will help you get to know the Russian national character, which reflects mercy, kindness, hard work, sacrifice, sincerity. Really? Okay. Okay. So they propagate this, they propagate their propaganda, right? They push their propaganda very well, but they're kind of losing it when it comes to something that people feel like the long gas lines. And I'll get to that in a moment. Let me show you some of the things that they're pushing and propagating here. Okay. The Russian propaganda teaches Russians that Germany, Finland, and Poland and the Baltic states, Ukraine, Azerbaijan were all created by Russia. That's a very, very dangerous narrative. Let's look at this. Okay, to listen to the Kremlin's propaganda. So half of the states on the modern political map, Eurasia, was created by Moscow. The existence of modern-day Germany was possible, says Solovyov. And by the way, we're going to talk about Solovyov in just a moment because they're watching Solovyov in public schools now. I'll show you that in a moment. Only thanks to the personal leadership of the Soviet Union, he says. The Russian Empire, or the USSR, according to the propagandists, created Germany, Finland, and even Poland. Well, I mean, Poland, they were trying to carve up with the Nazis, but they're not going to talk about that. There was no Finland at all. It just never existed. Finland as a state arose thanks to the Russian Empire. A lot of things were created by us. Finland, Poland, of course, Ukraine's not a real state either, they're going to argue. We created many states of Europe. Did anyone thank us? I'm not making this up. This is what they're saying on their own TV shows. No matter how old is the statehood of the individual peoples was, as the propaganda claims, there was no Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan or Moldova or the Baltic states. Okay, the Baltic states were part of the Soviet Union because the Soviets enfolded them, but they pre-existed. Like Lithuania, Poland was a thing well before we got into, I mean, this was the 14th century. Georgia and Armenia would also supposedly not exist without Russia. There were never, okay, so I mean, I don't even want to go any further with this. So that's the kind of thing that they're pushing in Russian state media. This is what propagandists are pushing. Just a little bit more. The Baltic states were the territory of the Russian Empire. There was no Azerbaijan in history until 1917, they say. I mean, it's just frustrating to watch them say this. It was invented by the Soviet government, which, within the stubbornness of malignant, gave statehood to everyone who was not lazy. Putin repeatedly said Ukraine was personally Lenin's. Lenin did this by creating Ukraine. The creator of modern Ukraine is Vladimir Lenin. Okay, but Ukraine existed before Russia did. So, okay, anyway, now Russian school children are imbibing this. They have started being shown the Russian talking points from propagandist Solovyov on screens during talks about important topics. Now, not necessarily that thing, but this is what school children are being taught. Moreover, Russian Telegram channels report that this isn't the initiative of individual schools or teachers. Solovyov has been directly incorporated into the school curriculum. So if you have state sponsor of media and you have state education and they're merging this together, well, they're trying to get on the same page with a consistent narrative. And then you have people like this lady. Behold, one of the most ridiculous statements ever to come from a Russian government official. Inira Yervaya should do stand-up comedy. Seriously, let's listen to what she has to say here because it's something. The Russian language has the greatest prospects as the language of dialogue and friendship. Huh? Because in the Russian language, there are not just words like in any other language. No, it's much more. It has very deep emotional and moral meanings that reflect the national character. Therefore, knowledge of the Russian language will help to get to know the Russian national character, which reflects mercy, kindness, hard work, sacrifice, and sincerity, she says. Many discoveries were gifted to humanity by our scientists. And therefore, it is not only a matter of culture, but a matter of scientific and technological development and progress. So she's trying to say why we should all learn Russian. Russia has a reasonable ambitions to be the leader in these matters. Okay, so that's the kind of thing and this is on task that's being pushed forward by Russian propaganda. So, okay, you got a sense of this now. But they're losing control of the propaganda networks. And my title was something close to this. So I'm not just plagiarizing. I'm giving credit here by saying, like, my title was something about how the Russians lose control of the propaganda narrative. For anyone paying attention, there is often a striking gap between seemingly calm Russian news and the discontent about the same events on Russia social media. Like if you're going and looking at what they're actually experiencing, like it's very different. And he gives example after example after example. In addition to the long-term economic problems, the Kremlin's propaganda machine has had even more difficulty dealing with massive and unexpected shocks related to the war. So, for example, Putin's partial mobilization in the fall of 2022 precipitated an unexpected mass immigration. Like people got out as soon as they understood that, uh-oh, there's going to be mobilization. I could be called up. I better get out of Russia. Online, the Kremlin spread positive news about the move, which improved public attitudes for about 2 weeks before they plummeted again and people got out as quickly as they could get themselves out. So the Kremlin sent out more messages on the issue, only to find the public sentiment falling again. With each wave of propaganda, the Kremlin's ability to maintain public support for mobilization became less effective, and they got out. So a lot of Russians got out of the country so that they could save their skin. And then take, for example, Prigozhin's shocking rebellion in June of 2023. As Prigozhin's Wagner army marched toward Moscow, the Kremlin's state media simply remained silent while awaiting the instructions. Now, part of this is because of centralization, right? They were waiting for instructions. Now, centralization's good in the sense that you can all get on the same message, but as opposed to free media, which is radically decentralized, they can talk whenever they want about however they want. Now, the Russians centralized because they have control of the message. It is also quickly became clear that the Russian elites, both the military and the general public, were not particularly concerned about stopping mutineers. Okay, so that was kind of interesting to see. While the country followed events with cold curiosity, some popular Russian military bloggers sided with Prigozhin. In the end, Prigozhin never exploited his advantage and was killed in a plane crash 2 months later. But the episode demonstrated how easily the Kremlin propaganda machine can become clogged. And when it does, Russia's various arms of power will not rush to the president's aid, but will wait for their opportunity to strike. Now, that's commentary, but it may very well be true. But they do say, look, nothing to see here. This isn't a thing. Debris fell. It wasn't those missiles. We shot those missiles down by them slamming into our tanks or whatever. Okay, the Kursk raid is the most recent shock of this kind. In the weeks since the Ukrainian offensive began, the government has continually tried to downplay the operation, claim that Russian forces are taking care of the problem when clearly they weren't, but Moscow has found it difficult to conceal the first major invasion on Russian soil since World War II. Even local state media dared to criticize Putin's response. Residents of the Kursk region believe that the government has abandoned them, ran one headline. And so, yeah, they were losing the narrative here. In each of these shocks, the Kremlin has demonstrated its inability to handle unseen events. Now, what kind of unseen events are we talking about? Like early in the war, we saw something like this. In the immediate aftermath of the Kursk raid, the Prigozhin mutiny, the Russian state television, accustomed to taking orders from above, was left to its own devices. Early in the war, you saw this lady somewhat heroically say no to war in this placard, and I think she was arrested shortly thereafter. When state-controlled media outlets don't receive immediate instructions on what stance to take, on when Telegram nationalists are carried away by emotions and don't receive clear orders, suddenly the patriotic pseudo-pluralism cultivated by the regime collapses, right? And so it may be tempting to conclude that Putin's authoritarian regime is immune to temporary declines in manipulation of public discourse. But yeah, I'm not so sure. Now, let's look at what's going on. I put this video out yesterday. This is about the fuel crisis that could become really problematic for Putin. So we're north of 20 20+%. I don't know how much 20 plus, but at least 20% as of about a week ago, with a few strikes since then, of Russia's refineries being taken offline. And there are long lines at the gas stations in Russia. And I talked about that, and they're really feeling it. All gas stations have been completely out of gasoline in Sotsky district, Nizhny Novgorod region. Residents are having to travel to neighboring cities to fill up their cars and fuel canisters. That's if they have the gas. In some places, they just don't have the gas and they can't even fill up. The fuel crisis continues to spiral in the Russian world, with black market gasoline now running over $9 per gallon. $9 per gallon now, which is equivalent to over half the average median monthly Russian salary for a fill-up. Okay, so $9 times the 10 or 15 gallons in your tank, and that's a lot. And that's like, they don't make the same amount that, I'm thinking as an American, okay, that would be really painful, but I could bear it, but it would be painful. Like, I wouldn't be taking extraneous trips. That is crazy painful. Okay, and then so you see things like these comments here. Gasoline collapse in the DPR and LPR. Huge 2 to 3 hour queues at gas stations. Resellers sell a liter for 200 rubles. A liter of 95th gasoline reaches 90 rubles at gas stations, or even more. In May 2024, by the way, 90 rubles, just move the decimal over so that you can kind of get a sense of how much that is to dollars, right? In May 2024, I wrote that Ukraine was methodically knocking out oil refineries, gas stations, fuel depots in the front line and near frontline zones. This was creating a gasoline collapse, despite the fact that regional authorities report the problem has been resolved. So this is the key. The regional authorities can say this all day long. The problem has been resolved, but the people know that it is not true, right? They're experiencing it. And so the propaganda won't work based on when your experience is actually the opposite of what they're saying. But the issue is acute regarding military. There is no military gasoline either. This is having that kind of effect. Sometimes they bring something, but they refuel an evacuation, the evacuation groups. The military refuel at general gas stations is at their own expense. The military have to refuel at their own expense. So this is going to gum up the works for the military, as well as have this propaganda issue. So this is a real thing, and it's going to be more and more acute as strikes continue. Okay, that's all that I have here. I hope that helps you understand what's going on. All day today, this morning, and in my last video and in this video, I've been talking about this. On Mondays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. GMT, you have to translate to your time from GMT. Like, I'm on Eastern Standard, so that's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard in the United States. I'm going to be doing, and I'll see how well this works. I'm going to be doing these shorter Q&As for the day, so that like you can just ask whatever questions you want to ask, and but we can do this with audio. You have to download either on your Apple device or on an Android device. You download the Podbean app, and then once you've done it one time and found Professor Gerdes Explains, you can call in as many times as you want, and we'll be able to just chat. And if you want to chat through the normal chat feature, you can do that as well. But I think this will be a more effective way to conduct this. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for this video. Tell me what you thought about what you saw, because I think the Russians are really good at doing this propaganda, but when reality is telling them one thing and propaganda is telling something else, like there's no gas at the pumps. All problems are solved, though. There's gas. I think the people are going to start experiencing it differently, and then the narrative is getting out of control. Okay. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.